We're going to go ahead and get started here. I think we're at 6 o'clock, and I'm sure you are anxious to get home, as am I. So we're going to go through the presentation tonight. You should have a copy. If you didn't grab one, there are copies out in the lobby where you can follow along with the presentation, take notes, whatever you need to do. This is going to be a very informal presentation. My name is Carrie Kropp. I work at Carroll University, but tonight I'm not here to represent Carroll University. I'm here to represent financial aid. Okay? So like I said, very informal. My main goal is to really answer your questions. If you're stressed out about something, you're not sure how to do something, please raise your hand and ask. I'll be happy to help with any questions I can. We are going to talk general financial aid tonight. We're not going to be school specific about anything. So if you do have school specific questions, you can reach out to the financial aid office at that school and ask them. But if it's FAFSA, financial aid, terminology, please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, okay? If you have a really personal question and want to come up after, I will stick around for a little bit if you do want to ask questions there. But if it's a general question, please ask it, because I always say if you're thinking it, someone else may be thinking the same thing, and if we can answer it for all of you, that'd be great, okay? And I understand we do have live stream and it's being recorded, so hopefully everyone out there too, we answer your questions as we go through the presentation. I know financial aid is not an exciting topic. Therefore, this is not a terribly exciting presentation. It's hard to make financial aid fun. But what I do hope we get out of it is that it makes you a little more comfortable with the process. Like I said, answers your questions, kind of gains you that experience and that confidence, that's the word, confidence in what you're about ready to go through here. So my first question is anyone not a senior? Do we have parents of juniors or sophomores even? Do you have one? Okay. Some of the presentation does talk about dates and years, so just know, push everything back a year for you. So like I said, we're going to go over financial aid basics tonight and hopefully make some of these terms a little more familiar to you. Financial aid has a lot of acronyms. So if you hear these terms, you might hear the full term or you might hear the acronym either on a financial aid offer, in literature they send out from the college, or from the financial aid professionals themselves. So we just want to make, like I said, familiar with the terms. We're also going to talk about kind of what the financial aid office itself does, what to expect, what you can expect from that office. Okay? So here's just a few questions and topics that we're going to go over tonight. Like I said, very basics. Okay? What is financial aid? We're going to go over some of those terms: cost of attendance, expected family contribution, financial need. What is financial aid? Where does it come from? How do I get it? And then special circumstances. So very basic, what is financial aid? It's really any money that is out there to help that student and family pay for that student's education. So we get students every year that say, well, I don't get any financial aid. And then we ask them, well, did you get a scholarship? Did you take out any loans? And they're like, well, yeah. That is exactly what financial aid is. So we just like to start with the very basic just to educate what is financial aid. So then our first fun acronym is cost of attendance, or COA for short. And what we want you to know is that the cost of attendance is going to be unique to every school that you are looking at to attend. So cost of attendance is made up of two parts. There's the direct cost, and then there's indirect costs. For a student living on campus, the direct costs are going to include the tuition and fees. These are costs that the school bills you for. So they're going to bill you for tuition, and then if there's any required fees. Then again, if you are on campus, the school is also going to bill you for room and board to live there. If you are not on campus, that room and board would not be a direct cost because they're not going to bill you for it. Okay? Indirect costs are going to cover things that the school doesn't charge you for directly necessarily, but that you are still going to incur as an educational cost. So most schools don't charge you for books and supplies. Now this may move up into the direct cost. They may bill you directly for books. But for most of the schools, the books are going to be an out-of-pocket cost to you that is not going to be billed directly by the school. Okay? There's things like transportation. Whether you live on or off campus, you still need to get to and from school, at least some points. And then miscellaneous personal expenses, things like shampoo and toothpaste, things like that. If you're living on campus, you're going to still have to incur those costs while you're at school. We still want you to use those things. So there's going to be those costs. Again, school's not going to bill you for toothpaste. So, but it is still an educational cost that is included in this cost of attendance, okay? So kind of takeaways, direct costs, those are the costs the school bills you for. Indirect costs, school does not bill you for, but we can combine those to determine a school's total cost of attendance, okay? And this is why when you look at a cost of attendance for a private school versus a public school, obviously those costs of attendance are going to be dramatically different based upon usually the tuition cost, okay? So again, really just want to point out, cost of attendance, different at every school, okay? This will come into play later. Then we have our expected family contribution. Has everyone heard of the FAFSA form? You heard of that before? So what the FAFSA form does, and we'll get into that a little bit later, is it determines your expected family contribution. That's what it calculates, okay? So EFC, expected family contribution, and it's basically what the FAFSA calculation is saying the family can afford to pay towards that student's education, okay? How many have done a FAFSA before? Do you remember getting your EFC and seeing that number? How many of you agreed with that EFC number? Right, exactly. So it's just a measurement. It is not what you are going to pay to attend school. It is what the schools use to determine some aid eligibility, but it is not what you are officially going to pay to attend every school, okay? That's where really the financial aid offices do their job to try to award you financial aid to make it affordable for you to attend. Now, sometimes you may end up paying less than that EFC. Sometimes you may end up paying more than the EFC. It just really depends upon what that student qualifies for and what they receive from the school in financial aid. Okay, and we'll kind of go through some examples with that. But basically with the EFC, the thing to know is that there are two components to that. There's a student component and a parent component. Those two added together give you your EFC. So when we get to the FAFSA questions, you'll kind of see there's student questions, there's also parent questions. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, great. So now we've learned our fun acronyms. So this is how we calculate financial need. So when we take our cost of attendance, remember cost of attendance is different at every school. Okay? Then we take our EFC. The EFC is from the FAFSA. That's what the FAFSA calculates again. But you only do one FAFSA, therefore you only get one EFC. So the EFC that gets reported to the schools you are looking at is the same number. But when you take your cost of attendance minus the EFC, that's where you get financial need. And again, because your cost is different at every school, your financial need will be different at every school. And kind of going back to what I said with looking at public schools versus private schools versus technical schools, each of those schools you will have a different financial need, okay? Obviously, higher cost schools, you'll have a higher financial need. But that's exactly why those schools typically award you more in financial aid than what the lower cost schools do, okay? And really the goal of the financial aid office is to hopefully meet or exceed your financial need, so it is affordable for you to attend that school, okay? As far as financial aid that's out there, it really is kind of this simple that there's two categories with 4 types. We always say kind of the gift aid on the right side there, that's the good stuff. We say it's good stuff because it's scholarships and grants. That is free money to the student that they do not have to pay back. So when you're looking at financial aid offers, you really want to know what type of financial aid you are receiving. You want to know, is this a scholarship, is this a grant, or is it one of the things from the left side, which is loans or campus employment or work study. The things on the left side, the self-help aid, still good, still forms of financial aid, but there's another component to it. With the loans, obviously the student has to pay that back. It's not free money, okay? And then with the work study, this is going to be dependent upon each college, but basically it typically allows the student to work on campus and earn funds. So again, not free money, you have to do something to get it, but it is still a form of financial aid. It's something that can help the student pay for their education. Okay? So again, takeaway, when you look at financial aid offers, you want to know which type of aid you are receiving. If I just tell you, your student, you're eligible for $25,000 in financial aid, well, it sounds good, but you want to know, okay, is that $20,000 in loans and $5,000 in scholarship, or is it, $15,000 in scholarship and $10,000 in loans? You want to know what that makeup is to know what's expected of you. Okay. Oh, there's supposed to be a little heading up here. What this says is this is a chart that is how the average student pays for their education. The percentages aren't showing up either. Really, it's about half of this, about 50%, just under 50%, is the grants and scholarships and the student and parent borrowing. So as we learned, borrowing, that's loans, you have to pay those back. Grants and scholarships, remember that's the good stuff, you don't have to pay back. But between those two categories, about 50% of the student's cost of education is covered by financial aid, okay? Now again, it's based on a survey, these are averages, so don't hold anybody to this. But just to kind of give you an idea, for most students, 50% is usually covered by financial aid. Now, I know some of it is loans, and I fully understand that, but there's typically lower interest loans that the student is available for. That's one of the options that's out there. The other part, we have parents' income and savings and students' income and savings, but my favorite part is the relatives and friends. It's 2% is what the percentage should show up there. So I say if you want to take this chart, you have handouts, this is what you take to Christmas, and you go to your family and friends and say, look, 2% of you need to contribute to my education. I don't know about you students, but when I went to school, my family did not really contribute. I didn't have those aunts and uncles giving me money to help me. So I don't know where these families are that are getting this money, but if you want to use it as leverage, please do so. So those are our types of financial aid. Again, very simple, the 4 types. And again, very simple, this is where the money comes from. The biggest one at the top is the federal government. And then on the left side, we have community and national. These are really going to be outside scholarship programs, and we'll touch base on those in a minute here. And then we have state. The state of Wisconsin does have financial aid programs available to students. For all of them, you do have to be a Wisconsin resident attending a Wisconsin school, and we'll touch base on the different types that are there, but that is primarily how you qualify for those, along with your FAFSA eligibility as well. Okay. The last one is colleges and universities. The school itself typically does have financial aid available to students. Now, obviously, this is going to be dependent upon which school you're looking at and what aid they have available. But this includes things like scholarships and grants from that institution themselves. Some schools also have loan programs available, and they can talk to you about those if that is an option for your student. So again, very simply, that's really the 5 sources. As we said, the federal government is the largest one out there. Most of the federal aid is awarded based upon need. When I talk about financial need, remember we talked about our cost, and then we have our EFC from our FAFSA, and then we have need. So that EFC is really what determines your eligibility for a lot of the federal aid that's out there. You do have to do the FAFSA. One of the F's in FAFSA is federal. So to apply for federal aid, you do need to complete the FAFSA form. And then potentially, based upon the type of program, there are other eligibility requirements. You don't need to do anything for these. The financial aid office, when we get your FAFSA, we will determine your eligibility for the federal programs. These are really the main sources you will see if you are looking for federal aid. Just want to make you aware of the terms if you see them on a financial aid offer. They should usually be labeled as federal, but just in case, these are just some of the terms you'll see out there. State program, like I said, Wisconsin does have state grant program. That is the largest one that they have. Again, the school will determine your financial aid eligibility for that grant. There's nothing more you need to do for that. Okay. As far as colleges and universities, some colleges and universities will award financial aid based upon the FAFSA results. Some will award other aid based upon your students' academics. So it's really a combination, and it's up to each school to determine their own awarding policy to determine how much aid you're going to receive from the school itself. Okay? So that's why you're going to see different aid amounts coming from every school. It's going to be based upon their costs, what they determine you are eligible to receive. So don't be alarmed if you see different amounts at different schools. Most of the aid is probably going to be gift aid, but again, just know some may be self-help. Remember, self-help is loans or work. Most schools will use the FAFSA, or all schools will use that FAFSA, but some may also have an additional form. If you ever heard of the CCS profile form, that is an additional financial aid form. And what it does is it really collects more financial information from the family, and the school uses that to determine their own institutional aid. So when it comes to federal aid, state aid, that's the FAFSA. But the institutions can put requirements on their own institutional aid. So if you see an additional form, just be aware that's what it's for. And that's an easy question to ask your admissions counselor. I'm sure you'll get notifications if there is additional forms, but it's something you may just want to ask, is the FAFSA the only financial aid form that's required of me? Okay. And the thing to be aware too is that some institutions place deadlines on the FAFSA and that additional form if they have it. So a school can say, if you do not submit your FAFSA to the Department of Education by March 1st, you will not be eligible for institutional aid. Okay? Again, that is only for their institutional aid, but you want to make sure you're meeting any deadlines. You do not want to miss out on any financial aid. So make sure you know of any deadlines that the school has that's specific to that school. Any questions so far about that? Next, we're going to talk about the community and the national programs, and like I said, those are really your outside scholarships. So it sounds like here they do a great job with outside scholarships. They definitely notify the students. They work with the students regarding outside scholarships and going through the list that they have at Student Services. So students, make sure you are watching emails and just paying attention. When that information comes about outside scholarships, take advantage of it, okay? The reason I say that is because there are definitely opportunities out there. But especially when they are from the community or school-specific scholarships, you have to take advantage of those because you are not competing nationwide for a scholarship. You are competing either with your school or with your community. There's a lot less students there that you're competing with, so definitely apply for those outside scholarships. This is definitely something you can work on now, but the thing to remember about outside scholarships is even after this first year, you can still apply for outside scholarships as long as you're meeting the eligibility requirements. So regardless of what school you're attending, you can always ask the financial aid office if they have information about outside scholarships. You can do your own searching or Googling to see if there's outside scholarships out there as well that you want to apply to. The biggest thing I would just say with outside scholarships is you shouldn't have to pay for an outside scholarship. So sometimes you might get an email, or they used to do postcards, send us $200, we guarantee to find you a scholarship, okay? You don't need to do that. You can do the same research on your own that they would do for you. So it's just my tip there, don't pay for outside scholarships. Excuse me. National programs are just what they are, a little more national that you're competing with. There's more websites out there available for those though. FastWeb, if anyone's heard of FastWeb, is the biggest one probably that we've seen or heard of, and it's been around for a long time. Thescholarship.com is another one. The other ones are more organizations that have information about scholarships as well. I know scholarships are not the most fun thing to apply for. They take time, but I would, like I said, definitely take the time to do them. If you take an hour, write an essay, and win a $1,000 scholarship, that's a great per hour rate. You will never have that anywhere else. So put in that time. And a lot of times if they do require that essay, a special essay, a lot of times you can tweak it and use it for another scholarship as well. So just making sure you're reading those questions that they're asking and answering anything that they have for you. Okay. So now we've been talking about the FAFSA, and now you want to know how to apply for it. Like we said, the community and national programs we just got done talking about are outside scholarships. FAFSA has no bearing on those, okay? Those are through those organizations. When it comes to the FAFSA, that's really your application for federal aid and state aid, like we talked about, and then also potentially institutional aid. So with the FAFSA, you're really covering the three main sources of financial aid. Some people may be thinking, okay, I'm not going to bother, waste my time, I don't want to do the FAFSA, I'm not going to qualify anyway. That may be true, but I can guarantee by going through the FAFSA process, assuming your student meets all the required eligibility requirements, like they're a U.S. citizen, things like that, they will qualify for a federal loan, which again, I know is a loan, not the best thing, but it is still something out there to help your student. But you're not going to know if you qualify for anything else unless you apply, okay? There might be grant aid from the school itself. You might end up qualifying for a state grant. You're not gonna know unless you apply, okay? And the first F in FAFSA stands for free. It is a free application. It does take some time. For those of you who've done it before, we're fully aware it takes some time, but it gets easier the next year. It carries over a lot of your information, but I would definitely take the time to go ahead and do that FAFSA. So what does the FAFSA do? It basically collects, remember we talked about there's a student portion and a parent portion. It collects that family's demographic and financial information for both the student and the parent. It calculates that EFC, that expected family contribution. And remember, that EFC is what the colleges use to help determine your financial aid eligibility. And then it is available in English and Spanish with lots more languages in the works if they're not already there. So lots of opportunity to fill it out. We talked about the filing deadline, that some colleges, again, may have specific deadlines. So the FAFSA opens on October 1st, so is that Saturday? Saturday, for the 2023-24 school year. So that'll open up in October, okay? Do you have to rush out and do it on October 1st? No, but we do recommend filling it out sooner rather than later. And we say that because the sooner you complete the FAFSA form, that information gets to the schools, the sooner we can do a financial aid offer for you so you know what it costs to attend that school and make an informed decision about if it is affordable for your family. Okay. As far as completing the FAFSA, there are different options to do it. The very first one is FAFSA on the web. Now, this is probably 99% of the population does the FAFSA online. It's popular because A, it's easy and it works. So we highly recommend FAFSA on the web, and we'll go over some reasons as to why here in a second. If you're not comfortable with filling it out online though, there is a paper FAFSA available. It's a PDF version you can download, print off, fill everything out, physically sign it, and then mail it in to the Department of Education. Obviously, it's gonna take a little bit longer for them to process and enter and all of that, but it is definitely possible. There is a FAFSA on the phone option. I'll be very honest, I have never, ever heard of anyone ever doing this. I can't imagine sitting on the phone with someone as they read you questions and you try to find information. I would think it would take forever. So definitely FAFSA on the web is the way to go. And the last option that shows up here is FAA access to CPS online. Like I said, we have lots of acronyms. What that means to you is that the financial aid office at some schools, it's rare, but there are some out there, where you can go in with your information, sit down with a financial aid person, and fill out the FAFSA online, and they can submit it for you, okay? Like I said, it is very rare just because of, honestly, resources, but then the FAFSA is really kind of that easy that you are perfectly able to do it on your own. Where we say is, though, if you get stuck on a question, you are more than welcome to call us, and we can help you through if you're stuck. You know, you can bring your stuff in, we can help you through that rough spot and get you to where you can submit your FAFSA. But again, it's something if you're interested in, you can definitely ask the school that you're looking at if they offer that option. Here's why the on-the-web application is so handy, and we love it. There's built-in edits to prevent errors. Anything we can do to prevent errors is saving you trouble and hassle and saving you time, but it's also saving us at the schools potential time as well. Because if we get a FAFSA and we see there's errors or potential errors, a lot of times we will follow up to ask because we want to make sure your application, your financial aid application is accurate, okay? So we might ask for additional documentation, things like that. If we don't have to do that, that's great. We don't want to. You don't want to submit it to us, so it just saves everyone lots of trouble there. So what it basically does with these edits is if you answer, question 5 one way, but then you get to question 10 and the answers kind of conflict, they will flag it and say, are you sure you answered those questions correctly? Okay. There is skip logic. There are certain sections of the FAFSA you could potentially skip a whole section of questions if you answer another question a certain way. So again, saves you time to skip over that section if you don't need to do it. There's something called the IRS data retrieval that's available online. The people who did the FAFSA, did you use the data retrieval and it worked well? Great. So what this data retrieval is, it is an optional thing. It's optional but highly recommended. It allows you to link out to the IRS and pull in your tax information right onto the FAFSA. So you don't have to look at your taxes and fill in the amounts. It does it for you, okay? This parent can do this and a student can do it as well, as long as you file taxes and meet their requirements. And we have a quick slide just to show you when you can't use the data retrieval, but by far most families can use the data retrieval. Okay. There's great help and instructions right there on the line as you're going through each questions. Timely submission. Let's just say you are super anxious and you want to get your FAFSA done on October 1st. First of all, great for you. I highly recommend if you can do it sooner, like I said, sooner rather than later, but you don't need to rush out October 1st. If you do it on that Saturday, typically the schools, we will have it by Tuesday or Wednesday. So it goes extremely quick. Okay? The student, you can check your application status online. You can see if it's submitted. Or if you call the school and they don't have your FAFSA, you can go out to the website to say, oh, I didn't click submit. You just saved it. So you can kind of see where you're at in the process. Then, as I mentioned before, there is a simplified application process for future years. The FAFSA is not just a one-time thing. To maintain eligibility for certain aid programs, you have to do the FAFSA every year, okay? So when you do it the following year, it carries over a lot of your demographic information, so you don't have to sit there and re-put in your address, unless it changes, but then it gives you the option to change it if you need to. Okay. So far, so good? Okay, great. Here's a screenshot of the FAFSA on the web, and you'll kind of see the two buttons. One is Start Here up at the top. This is if you are doing a new FAFSA. So if you as a student, and I say student because the FAFSA is technically the student's application. As you're going through the application, it'll say, what is your name? When it says that, it's meaning the student, okay? There will get to a section about the parents, and then it'll ask, what is parent 1 name, or what is parent 2 name? They will identify that this is where the parents need to put in their information. So think of the FAFSA as the student's application. So if you're a student, you're a first-year student, and need to do the FAFSA, you click the top. If you've done a FAFSA in previous years, that's where you click the bottom one, and that's how when you log in, it will carry over your demographic information. Okay. We do have the website at the bottom here. The key is that we want to make sure you're getting to the right site. The website used to be FAFSA.gov. It's pretty straightforward. Now where they direct you is studentaid.gov, and then you can link to the FAFSA from there. This student aid website has really become a one-stop shop for everything financial aid with the Department of Education. So really students will go out here to apply for aid. If they do take out student loans, this is where they go to do that paperwork right online. When you're in repayment on your loans, after you graduate, this is where you go out to see information about that as well. And there's also just a great financial aid knowledge out there, the terminology, the basics, kind of what to expect. It's just, like I said, a general website for financial aid, but then also when the student logs in, it gives specifics about their financial aid information as well. Okay. Now I said the FAFSA is a student's application. There is an option to where the parent can start the application for the student, okay? My recommendation, and from what we've seen, is that really, ideally, if the student and parent can sit down together and do the FAFSA, that is great. So ideally, we want the student to start the application. That just makes things a little more smooth for everybody. You can save the FAFSA as you're going through it. So if you're short on time or know you only have half an hour to really work on it tonight, but know you'll have more time tomorrow, you can definitely start it, save it, and go back to it tomorrow. Okay? With the FAFSA online, we know sometimes it's hard or intimidating. You don't know what information to have in front of you when you're going to do the FAFSA. So what they came up with is something called the FAFSA on the Web worksheet. And this is a PDF form that you can download from the FAFSA website. And it's really a worksheet that follows the questions on the online form so you can have the information prepared, if you're one of those that likes to prepare. So it's not really doing a whole FAFSA per se, it's just getting your information for the questions that will be asked in the same order as the FAFSA. The paper FAFSA that you actually mail off and submit has more questions to it. They're not going to have you fill out your name. You know your name. So this is really collecting the information, the financial pieces of the information. So you have it prepared. So when you do go to do it online, you have those numbers in front of you and you can just plug them in. Okay? And again, this is available for download on the FAFSA website. So we talked about how the FAFSA has parent information and student information. This is kind of the steps you'll walk through as you are going through the FAFSA. The first one it starts out with is student demographics. So name, address, social security number, date of birth, driver's license if they have one, things like that. The key when it comes to demographics, whether it be student or parent, is that you are using your legal name, first of all, and that the social security number, please double check it when you enter it, okay? What they do when you submit your FAFSA is they do a check with the Social Security Administration between your name, date of birth, and social security number, okay? So they want to make sure those things match. That's where I say if your name is Elizabeth and you go by Beth, make sure you're putting Elizabeth on your FAFSA, okay? This is why I say student, you need to do the FAFSA. You need to be involved in this process. But if parents are with you, that's great. It seems we always have, at least once a year, Dad decided, I'm going to do the FAFSA for my student. Well, Dad messes up the social security number or transposes a number or takes it from, we had triplets one year. Dad did the FAFSA for his triplets, and he mismatched all their data with each other. It causes a huge mess. So it's really making sure the information you put on the FAFSA is accurate, double check it before you move on, okay? Next section will be school section. So you have the opportunity on the FAFSA to select up to 10 schools that you want your FAFSA information sent to, okay? If you have more than 10 schools, that's okay. You have to start with 10 schools though, maximum. If you only have one school you're looking at, you can just list one school and that's perfectly fine. But by listing the schools on your FAFSA, that's how we get your financial aid information, your FAFSA information. And then that's kind of our cue, oh, you want a financial aid offer. So without having that, we don't know necessarily that you want a financial aid offer from us. So make sure you're listing the schools you're interested in on your FAFSA. There's a lookup option right there. You can look them up by state and then search by name and pull them in onto the FAFSA. Okay. If you have more than 10 schools, or if there's another school that comes into play, later on throughout the process after you've done your FAFSA, this is where you can go back, log back into your FAFSA, and adjust schools, add some, take some off, as you wish. Only the schools listed on the FAFSA will get that information each time you submit it. Okay. Then the FAFSA goes to dependency status. So when we talk about dependency status for the FAFSA, it is different than what is dependency status for taxes. Okay, so you got to kind of separate those two. We do have a slide that'll show you what goes into the dependency part for the FAFSA, but basically if you are determined as a dependent student for the FAFSA, parental information is required, okay? If, according to FAFSA, you are independent, then parental information is not required. And like I said, we'll touch base on what affects that here in a second. So if a student is dependent, we said parent information is required, therefore it'll move on to the parent section. So parent demographics will be required to be listed. And again, parents, check your name, check your social security number, make sure your date of birth is right. We just want to make sure that, because they will do a check on your information as well. And this is usually where we get the question about, well, my parents are divorced. Well, what do I do here? So parents, if you are divorced, the FAFSA asks, who has the student lived with the most in the past 12 months? If that's dad, dad's information goes on the FAFSA. Mom, biological mom, does not, okay? If dad is remarried, then stepmom's information goes on the FAFSA as well. But again, mom's does not, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So then we have the parent demographics. It moves on to the financial section. It'll ask for the parent's financial section, and this is where you can use that handy-dandy data retrieval thing from the IRS. Pull in your tax information so you don't have to look at them. There will be some financial questions that the FAFSA, or excuse me, the data retrieval cannot pull in because they don't come from your taxes. Just really got to make sure you read the instructions. If you get stuck, you can call us. we can help you. There is a FAFSA customer service line. I'd recommend you call the schools. Sometimes you get conflicting information from the customer service folks. So the schools, like I said, I'd recommend you call them with specific questions. Then you'll move on to the student financial information as well, and you kind of do the same thing. And then you sign and submit. And we're going to talk about how you sign it online here in a second. But the biggest thing is make sure you submit. Like I mentioned, you can save your FAFSA as you go. Well, just by saving it, you're not submitting it. So you need to go through that final step of submitting it and getting that confirmation page. That's your cue. Your FAFSA has been submitted to the Department of Education. Okay? Any questions on that steps? Great. We kind of walked through most of these, but just kind of some things you are going to need that you have handy. We talked about the Social Security numbers. Students, if you have a driver's license, you'll need that. With the FAFSA that's opening on Saturday, it's going to look at 2021 tax information. Again, if you use the data retrieval, it'll automatically pull that in. But if you don't, you want to make sure you're looking at the correct taxes. So 2021 completed tax information is what it's going to ask for. Current bank statements, the FAFSA does collect asset information, and we'll touch base on, we'll give you some tips on what to include and what not to include here. Then if you own your own business or have investment information, that is going to be potentially included as well. So to sign the FAFSA, you do have the option when you get to the sign section, you can print off a page, physically sign it, and mail it into the Department of Education. It kind of defeats the purpose of doing the form online, but you can definitely do that. So what they have is something called an FSA ID. It's Federal Student Aid ID. This is something you can actually do now. You do not have to wait until October 1st to do this. If you as a parent, you will sign off on your section of the FAFSA. Therefore, a parent will need an FSA ID, and then the student, because they have, remember, their section of the FAFSA, they will need an FSA ID as well. Okay? So you as a parent, if you did a FAFSA yourself, or you already have an FSA ID from another student who's maybe in previous years you've done a FAFSA for, that's your same FSA ID. Once you have it, it's kind of yours. It's kind of like your PIN number, unless you change it, it is yours for every year. So again, a parent that's on the FAFSA is going to need an FSA ID, and then the student will need an FSA ID as well. Okay? I always recommend only the person who that FSA ID belongs to should be the one applying for it and completing the FSA ID application. What that means basically is parents don't get the student's FSA ID, and students don't get the parents'. They do have you set up a set of security questions, and more than often, we have run into issues where the FSA ID, it doesn't work for some reason, and the parent goes to reset it. They don't know the answers to their security questions because their student did it for them. So again, only the person it belongs to should be the one applying for that FSA ID. And then when it comes to the students, you want to make sure you are not using your high school email address when you apply for this FSA ID. Really, your FSA ID is going to be your email address, and then there's a password that you assign or you pick for it. You do not want to use your high school email address because that is going to become deactivated once you graduate. You want to use an email address that you look at, that you use on a regular basis, but you know that you're going to have for future years as well. Okay. Any questions about the FSA ID? Okay, great. I think I've talked enough about the data retrieval, but just really, again, know that it is voluntary. The reason we do recommend it is because, kind of going back to when I mentioned about errors, if we see that something doesn't look quite right on your FAFSA, we may ask you for follow-up documentation. We may ask for your taxes, your tax information, just to make sure, again, the application was done correctly. If you use the data retrieval, we know it's correct. We're not going to question it. These are the reasons why you cannot use the data retrieval on the FAFSA. The very first one is kind of the obvious one. If you say you didn't file a tax return, you're not going to be able to use the data retrieval. If your marriage date is after, it really should say 2022. And the reason for that is because if you recently got married, the FAFSA can only pull in one person's tax information, or I should say one tax return. Let's say that. If you are married and were married, when you do the data retrieval, it'll pull in that married filing jointly tax return, okay? But if you recently got married, it can't pull in you and your new spouse's tax return. It can't pull in two separate tax returns. So if that makes sense. Just know it can only pull in one tax return. At my high school night last week, I don't remember, honestly, why the first three digits of the SSN would be 666. It still doesn't sound good, whatever it is, but I don't know the reason, but there's a reason behind it. If your Social Security number does start with 666, you cannot use a data retrieval. My assumption is you're not a U.S. citizen, and that's why you would not be able to do that. Because if you file a non-U.S. tax return, the next one, you cannot use the data retrieval. Data retrieval is the IRS, it's U.S. tax returns. Kind of the same reason before about not being able to pull in two people's tax returns. If you filed as married and had a household, or married but joint returns, or excuse me, married but separate returns, it cannot do that where it pulls in the two, therefore you can't use the data retrieval. If neither parent has a valid Social Security number. So this really comes into play if the student is a U.S. citizen but parents are not. You can still do the FAFSA, but they cannot use the data retrieval because they don't have the valid Social Security number. And then kind of the same thing with the last one. If there are all zeros on the FAFSA for a Social Security number, you can't use the data retrieval because there's nothing to match against with the IRS. Okay. The other one I always throw in here is if you have directionals in your address, you potentially will not be able to use the data retrieval. We have found issues with that. Some people it works perfectly fine for, others have had issues. So just be aware if you don't meet any of these, but you have directionals in your address and it's not working for you, that may be why. Okay, again, it's okay, it's totally an optional thing, but just be aware that that's why. So here's our dependency questions. Like I said, if you cannot answer yes to one of these, the student is considered dependent for FAFSA purposes, totally different than IRS purposes. And basically that the student's over 24, that they are not in a master's or graduate program, let me back up. If you answer yes to one of these, you're considered independent. So you're over 24, you're in a master's or grad program, you are married, you have a child that you support more than 50%. And that's really the key about the 50%. If you are the student and you have a child, but you live at home with your mom and dad and they really help support that child the most, you cannot answer yes to that question. Okay? So the key is the student has to support that child more than 50%. And then you're a veteran, or you're currently serving, you were in foster care or ward of the court. Emancipated minor we don't have in Wisconsin, so we don't worry about that one too much. But then in legal guardianship are homeless. And I will say for kind of the last few, when it comes to foster care, legal guardianship, things like that, it is very possible the school will follow up with the student to make sure that they answer that question correctly. Because a lot of times, going back to when I say parents sometimes do the FAFSA for the student, the parent will get to the question about, do you have a dependent or child that you support more than 50%? And they will say yes. And yes, the parent does, but remember, this is the student's application, these are the student's questions. So the student may not have a child they support more than 50%. So that's why we as the school sometimes will follow up just to confirm that information. Not necessarily saying you did anything wrong, we're just making sure the data is accurate. So as far as assets that show up on the FAFSA, these are kind of the big ones that we see or have gotten questions on from year to year. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, stock options, things like that are considered an asset on the FAFSA. The other big one we see is 529 plans. So that's going to be your EdVest, or if you have a 529 through another state. 529 plans are included on the FAFSA as an asset of the parent. Okay? So as a parent, if you have two children and you have money in EdVest kind of set aside for both of them, you do include the total value of your EdVest account. And the reason for that, what they tell us, is because you can easily move that money from student to student. you in your head or on paper have it planned to go to those 2 students, but they do require you to report the total value of what you have. Okay. Now, if Grandma and Grandpa have an EdVest account that is for the student on behalf of the student, that does not get reported on the FAFSA as an asset. Okay. Real estate, we put this one on here because it's not your principal residence, though. You do not put the value of your principal residence or your cars, things like that. This is if you have a vacation home up north. You would include the net value of that on your FAFSA. Okay. A lot of times you get the question, what if I own it with my brother, and we half own it? Then it's just going to be your portion of what you would get if you were to sell it, kind of that net worth. That's what you would report on the FAFSA, just kind of your portion. Okay. As far as what not to include, we talked about the car, your principal residence, things like that. The other biggie is retirement accounts. If you have funds in a specific retirement account, like a 401k, a 403b, they are not included on the FAFSA as an asset. Okay? However, if you have money in your savings account that you say, okay, $20,000 of that is for retirement, because it's not in a specific retirement account, it is in just kind of your savings, that does get reported on the FAFSA as your cash savings and checking amount. Okay? It has to be in the actual retirement account to not be included. Any questions on assets? This is kind of the school section. As you can see, it got a little wonky with the formatting. But basically, this is where you can search for the schools, list up to those 10 schools, and remember, if you have more than 10 or another school pops up later on in the process, you can always go back to your FAFSA, log in. Now you would log in with your FSA ID to your account, and you can make changes, add schools, take schools off as you wish. So you've gotten your FSA ID, you fill out your FAFSA, you've submitted it with your FSA IDs. What happens now? What happens is the Department of Education will process that FAFSA. It usually goes pretty quick. Right away, though, you will get something called a student aid report, SAR for short. What this really is a summary of the information that was put onto the FAFSA. The students will get an email saying, hey, your FAFSA has been processed, but this student aid report will also be on their studentaid.gov account that they can view at any time they want. You don't need to do anything with it. It really is for your records. The only thing we do say is that you can look it over to make sure things look appropriate. You didn't fat finger a number or transpose a number. You can just double check to make sure the information you put on it is accurate. Okay? On the student aid report, you'll also be notified of what your EFC is, that expected family contribution. And about the same time you're getting the student aid report, the information is also being sent to the schools you listed on the FAFSA. So it's really your clue that your FAFSA has been processed, or being processed when you get the student aid report. This fun chart is really just kind of show you how the EFC, the components that go into it. Now this is a very simplified version of what actually happens, but just kind of a couple key things I like to point out. Kind of what we've been saying the whole time, there's a student contribution or student portion of the FAFSA and a parent portion of the FAFSA, and they are really kind of kept separate when it comes to calculating that EFC. I'm going to start with the student side. The keys I point out are with the income. So if a student made about $7,000 or less, it's really as if the student didn't work at all for the FAFSA purposes. They are not including any of that income towards the student's contribution unless it's over that threshold, that about $7,000 threshold. Okay? So a lot of times the students will say, well, I'm going to get penalized if I work. No, you're not, unless you're working like a lot, which is great still. But even at that point, it's only 50% of that amount over $7,000 that's going to be counted towards that contribution. Okay? And then when it comes to assets for the student, you'll see it's just a flat 20%. So 20% of any assets that are listed on the student side in those cash savings and checking, that's really the most common one for students. 20% of that is going to be included towards that contribution calculation. Okay? Or if we flip over to the parent side, you'll see we have very similar chart here. There's one added section, but with the parent's assets, kind of in the middle there on the parent side, you'll see it's up to 12%. So the maximum parent asset contribution is going to be 12%. And we say up to 12 because there's other factors that go into the parent's contribution piece, like the number in family, the number in college, the age of the parent, the state you live in, things like that. So that's why it's not quite as cut and dry as what it is on the student side. But it's really just to know that parents' assets are not looked at as heavily. They know they have more expenses, things to cover, retirement coming up, things like that. Okay? And then with the income, you can see, again, it's not quite as cut and dry. There's a formula that goes into it. So that's what, when people ask, well, if I make this amount, am I going to qualify? It's not that simple as far as how much you make. There are so many other things that go into this calculation. Okay? The other thing I want to point out is the number in family and the number in college. You'll see it on the parent side of the contribution. So how this comes into play really is with that number in college. If you as a student, or excuse me, you as the parent have 2 students in college, what it's going to do is take your parent contribution and divide it in 2. So half of it's going to go towards one student's contribution, and the other half will go towards the other student's contribution. Okay? So just know that the number in college will be affected, affect your parent contribution. The thing with the number in college is it is dependent children. Parents, you cannot be included in that number in college unless it's a special circumstance, which we'll talk about here in a couple minutes. Okay. If the thought of doing a FAFSA just totally overwhelms you and you're like, I need help, I need someone to sit down with me and help me, there is help available. There's something called College Goal Wisconsin, which there was a handout out on the table for you. We give you the website here as well. What College Goal Wisconsin does is allows you to attend one of these either in-person or virtual events, and there are financial aid volunteers and professionals there to assist you through the FAFSA process. So ideally, if you go to an in-person site, the parent and the student would come together, bring their information to complete the FAFSA, and you can sit there and do it at a computer, and if you get stuck, there is someone there to help you. That's the ideal situation. You get your FAFSA submitted, you're done usually like in an hour, and you're good. Sometimes you do get stuck. We've worked these events, and we get you as far as we could possibly can, but sometimes you maybe are missing a piece of information. Worst case, we get you as far as we can go, you still save it, you go home, you understand now what you need to do to finish it, and can get it submitted at home. These events are great. Like I said, it's totally a volunteer run thing for families. There are virtual events, like we talked about, that you can register for. The benefit of going to an in-person event, aside from the hands-on help, is that there's also scholarships available. It's a random drawing. Once you have done the FAFSA, either submitted it or gotten as far as you can, you do put your name and your contact information. It literally goes into a bowl, and then once all the events are done, they do draw a winner from each site, and you can win a $1,000 scholarship just for doing the FAFSA. Okay. Talked about most of these, but just kind of what to expect from the financial aid office. We are there to determine your aid eligibility based upon that FAFSA form. Okay. We use that EFC from the FAFSA to determine that. We put together a financial aid award for that student and notify the student, hey, here's the financial aid you are receiving from our school. Usually it has your estimated cost for that school, shows you your financial aid. Again, remember, you want to know, is it a scholarship, is it a grant, is it loan, is it work? What types of financial aid am I getting? Okay. As far as how we send you those notifications, unfortunately it is going to vary from school to school. Some schools will send you a paper copy of a financial aid offer and a big old packet of stuff. Some will send you an email or a postcard saying your financial aid offer is available online for you to view. Just know it's going to vary. It's okay. It's going to be the same type of information. Layout may be a little different. Just want to make sure you're looking at those emails that you do get, logging in where you need to. The biggest thing for our financial aid office, though, is I would say we are there to help you through this process to answer questions you have. Do not be afraid to ask questions. We would way rather have you ask questions so we can get them answered before your student is ever on our campus, or even before they've committed to attend our school. We want you to know what to expect throughout the whole process. Okay? So do not be afraid to ask questions. Okay? Just a quick timeline for you. This is the time you should be applying to schools, completing those admissions applications. Make sure you know of any of those other documents that they may require or any deadlines that they have. Now, again, starting on Saturday, you can start filing your FAFSA. Every school is a little bit different as far as when they start issuing financial aid offers. So it's up to each school. Definitely a question you can ask the school if you want to know. But usually January through May is when you will see them all come through, and you can then compare them and make an informed decision about what school is affordable for you. Okay. Any questions on the timeline? Okay. We talked about most of the errors that we see. Social Security numbers, we talked about the divorced and remarried parents. When it comes to the income and the untaxed income and the taxes paid, those next three questions, it really is reading the instructions. If you read the instructions, if you get stuck, there's a little help button. As long as you can read through that, you should be okay. Again, though, if you do get stuck, not sure what to put, call us. We'll be happy to help you. Okay. Household size number in college, really the point of that one is, again, parents, you cannot be in that number in college. And then real estate and investment net worth. Again, the FAFSA outlines really well what to include and what not to include. So as long as you're reading the instructions, you will be okay. We talked about scholarship searches, and you don't have to pay for those. Same goes for the FAFSA. Again, the first F in FAFSA is free, so you don't have to pay for the FAFSA. Now, there are definitely organizations out there where you can pay an advisor or something like that to help you through the FAFSA process. That is definitely your prerogative to choose to do that. You can do it on your own with the help of a financial aid person if you want to. But if you choose to pay someone, that is okay. Just be careful that you're not being scammed. Make sure it's a legitimate place. Okay? Special circumstances. So when you do the FAFSA, everything is really a snapshot at that point in time you are completing the FAFSA. Okay? So when it comes to like your assets, things like that, your cash savings and checking, you could probably go in there every week and update those amounts. You don't do that. It's a snapshot as of the day you do your FAFSA. That's the information you put. Okay? Now we know things happen. Things change unexpectedly that you were not expecting, hence unexpectedly. Those we call special circumstances. So that's where, these are the big ones that we see. Loss of employment, a parent unfortunately passes away, parents get divorced, things like that. So if you have a special circumstance, you really don't do anything on the FAFSA. Remember, your FAFSA is just a snapshot. What you submit is what you submit. Special circumstances, you need to work with the schools directly. And unfortunately, if you're looking at 3 different schools, you will need to reach out to each one of those to see what you can do or how they can help you as far as your financial aid eligibility. Every school, unfortunately, may have a different process, so you need to make sure you know what is required at each school. But we're more than happy to walk you through what is needed and then see if there's additional aid eligibility for the student based upon these unexpected events. Okay. This is also where, we don't have it listed here, but if there is a parent that has gone back to school and they have, excessive college expenses themselves, that is something you can definitely talk to the school about as well to see if then the parent can be included in that number in college. And I will say, just because one school does something with a special circumstance does not guarantee another school will. They call this a professional judgment process, so it is up to each school to determine how things will be affected. Just some tips. We talked about applying as early as possible. Make sure you know of any required forms and that you're getting those returned to the school in a timely manner. When it comes to looking at financial aid offers, we talked about at the very beginning our cost of attendance. Remember, those direct costs are the cost the school bills you for. So when you are comparing schools, we do recommend you kind of start with that direct cost. How much does it cost to attend that school? What are they going to charge me for? And then when you have your financial aid offer, use your gift aid. Remember, gift aid is the good stuff, the scholarships and grants. Subtract that from that direct cost. And that's really going to kind of give you your true cost. Okay? Every school is going to be able to offer you federal loans if you go through that FAFSA process. So that's going to be consistent at all the schools. So you really want to know, what is my cost after my free money? Okay? The one thing I will caution you is that when you are comparing those numbers, obviously if you are looking at one school to live on campus and another school to live off campus, more than likely your school that you're living on campus, that cost is going to be greater. So just make sure you're factoring that in as well. Find out what happens to your financial aid in future years. No school can guarantee federal or state aid from year to year. Okay? That's based upon your FAFSA that you do. You want to know more, what happens to my institutional aid any monies that the college or university gives to that student, what happens to that aid from year to year? Does it stay the same? Can it go up? Can it go down? What's that based upon? Okay. Cost increases. Most schools will have a cost increase in at least their tuition from year to year. So you want to make sure you're preparing for that, know what to expect. College is not just a one-year thing. It's going to be, a 1 to 4 year thing for undergrad, or 5 or 6 maybe, hopefully not. But then they have to go on to graduate school as well. So you want to know what to expect over the course of the student's education. Find out if the school has payment plan options, because that could help affect your affordability. If they have additional payment plan information and options for you, that may make one school affordable, or another school, if you have to pay a lump sum, may not be quite as affordable. So just know that all your options that are out there. Then outside scholarships. Really the key with outside scholarships, for the most part, if a student brings in their own funding, the school is going to add it on top of what they've already offered the student, what they're already eligible for. There used to be a little bit more times where a school would say, you're eligible for $10,000 in financial aid from us. But then if you brought in $1,000 of your own, then the school would say, well, now I'm only giving you $9,000 because you brought in $1,000 of your own. That doesn't happen very much anymore, but it's definitely a question. It's very easy to ask. Do I see the benefit of outside scholarships? So again, you want to know what to expect. Okay. StudentAid.gov, that's the site where you can do your FAFSA. But again, remember I said this is also the site that is very financial aid information heavy as well. It's your one-stop shop from applying for financial aid all the way through repaying. So definitely take a site out there. And then that is all I have for you. My name is Carrie. I'm the one in the bottom left. I would encourage, again, if you do have questions right now, please feel free to ask them. But if something comes up later and you are like, oh, shoot, I should have asked that, you can definitely email me. Otherwise, again, I will be available after for more personal questions. So any questions out there? I know I wasn't that good or that thorough, so someone has to have some question. Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. I hope you found it informational at least. Like I said, not the most entertaining, I'm fully aware, but I want to make you hopefully a little more at ease about the process, what to expect as you're coming up here in the next few months. Congratulations to you seniors, and wish you the best in your senior year. Thank you.